I'm here on behalf of Project ECHO and WHO. So welcome to today's session on the COVID-19 vaccination session for capacity building for healthcare workers. The topic for today will be reporting on COVID-19 vaccines. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that today's session will have interpretation. So we have interpretation in both French and Spanish, and that's available. So if you click on the interpretation button on the bottom toolbar, you'll be able to select the language you want to listen in. Next slide, please. So if you click on interpretation, you can select English or French. And if you want to only listen to the interpreted language only, you can select mute original audio. Next slide, please. So just a reminder in terms of questions and chat. So use the Q&A feature if the questions relate to the topic and the presentations. However, if you have any questions regarding IT, logistics, or the certificate of attendance, please use the chat feature instead. Next slide. So this session is being recorded and your attendance is consent to be recorded. Please note that the recordings will be shared after the session in all three languages, that's English, French, and Spanish. A certificate of attendance is also available. So towards the end of the session, a link will be shared on chat. And if you click on the link, you can share out, you can fill up a brief feedback form. And then after that, you'll get a certificate of attendance. Next slide. So regarding data use, so Project ECHO does collect data from various sources, that's registration, participation, the Q&A, the chat comments, and the poll responses. And that's shared with WHO. So please note that your individual data will be anonymized, it's de-identified, and it's kept confidential. So the aggregate data it may be used for various kinds of reporting like maps, communications, surveys, quality assurance, evaluation, etc. Next slide, please. So apart from the session today, so you can also access the open WHO trainings. So we will be pasting the links in the chat. So in case you'd like to visit those after the session. So there's sessions on orientation to national deployment and vaccination planning, the COVID-19 vaccination training for healthcare workers, vaccine specific resources. And if you look at the link at the bottom, there's also a vaccine introduction toolkit, which that's basically a one-stop shop for guidance, tools, and training. So we will be posting all of these links on chat, and please feel free to access those. Next slide, please. Over to you, Shoshana.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Karen. Next slide, please. I'll start off with a couple announcements as always. So we have short instructional videos. These are all under 5 minutes that have been developed to help you handle, prepare, and administer the AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines. There's also a video that helps you to identify anaphylaxis. These resources are available through the links that you can see here, and the presentation will be shared with all participants after the call, as Karen mentioned. In addition, you can find these video links on the COVID-19 vaccine specific course. It is currently available in English, Chinese, and Russian, and will be available in Arabic, Spanish, French, and Portuguese shortly. Next slide, please. In addition, we have a number of job aids that may be useful for health workers. First one is the COVID-19 vaccine checklist that helps health workers who are planning a COVID-19 vaccination session to conduct the necessary calculations and prepare for the appropriate tasks. With the presentation, you'll be able to access this resource in English, Spanish, French, Arabic, Russian, and Portuguese. Chinese is coming shortly. In addition, there is the health worker community indication for COVID-19 vaccination flow diagram. This is helpful for health workers as they go through the conversation with interested participants about the COVID-19 vaccine. It helps health workers to explain whether or not the person is eligible for COVID-19 vaccination, share key messages on receiving the vaccine, and is currently being updated to include key messages to help pregnant women make the decision of whether they would like to be vaccinated. Next slide, please. We would also like to announce that the COVID-19 vaccine introduction toolkit that Karen mentioned earlier today is now available in all UN languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. Please feel free to use this. It has all of the resources, guidance, training, and tools. And please feel free to share it widely. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, or would like to share your experiences, please feel free to reach out to us at the COVID-19 vaccine resources at who.int email. Next slide, please. Today, we will be talking about reporting. We will first start with monitoring COVID-19 vaccination, followed by mechanisms for reporting and monitoring AEFI, adverse events following immunization. We'll have a brief panel, followed by our what's next and questions and answers from you. Next slide, please. Today, our goal is to share key information on reporting COVID-19 vaccination. We have two learning objectives. The first is to increase understanding of how monitoring for COVID-19 vaccine should be conducted. The second is to highlight key aspects on reporting and monitoring AEFI. Next slide, please. I'd now like to turn it over to my colleague, Jan, to walk us through monitoring COVID-19 vaccination. Over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Shoshana. So my name is Jan Grevendonk. I work in WHO in the immunization department and actually in EPI, so focusing mostly on childhood vaccinations, but now on COVID as well. Next slide, please. So first of all, what do we mean with monitoring and why would we do it? So there's a guide there that's there on the right, which is one of the resources that is now available. So it's available in English, but it will soon also be available in all these other languages that you see here. So the 6 UN languages plus Portuguese. And so basically that describes the entire kind of the objectives we have with monitoring and why we do it and the systems we use to do it. But what is it? First of all, it's the entire process of documenting vaccinations in all kinds of records, reporting it onwards to public health authorities, and then the entire process of monitoring indicators, dashboards, and taking corrective action where and when needed. So why is it important? So first of all, to monitor progress, the speed of introduction, if you want, or the uptake. And wherever you live, I think you will have heard in the press or in the press or other channels what kind of percentage of people in your country were vaccinated, even how that compares to other countries, if it's falling behind, if it's ahead, etc. So there's actually a lot of attention being placed on that, monitoring at the highest level, even by national leadership. So the second part of why monitoring is important is actually to look at equity and see if the outcomes are equitably distributed in the country, to see whether, for example, the capital of the country is not more vaccinated than people in the rural areas, that rich people have the same chance of being vaccinated as poor and vice versa. And of course, equity among genders and other dimensions of equity considerations. So with COVID, it's a bit different. There's one reason why actually we would consider, or we would expect certain groups to be prioritized, and those are the at-risk groups. So of course, first of all, the healthcare workers, which a lot of you are, but then also older people, so those over 60 or 65, whatever the national definition is, people with a pre-existing condition, etc. So we would expect actually those people to be immunized first. So we actually would like to see better outcomes among those groups ahead of the others. Then a few other very important functions of the monitoring system is to provide a personal vaccination record. And actually I have a slide about that, so I'm not going to talk about that now. And also like keep the documentation so that first of all, you can monitor individuals, make sure they come back for the second dose, and also provide all the documentation that you need, for example, when there's an adverse event, some safety concern, or for disease surveillance or for vaccine effectiveness studies later. So next slide, please. So focusing a bit on what is different this time. So you might all be involved with either influenza vaccination or childhood vaccination. So what is really different and why do we need to pay a little bit more attention to monitoring this time? So the first point is, of course, that as you know, there's many vaccines available and they all have a different efficacy, safety profile, duration of protection, which we even don't know yet how long it will be, and dose requirements. So even in one country, there may be up to 5, 6, 7 vaccines available at any given time. And of course, that complicates things for health workers and for the system and the public health authorities. The second thing is that there's new target priorities, and you might have talked about that in a previous webinar. But these target populations and the at-risk groups are not groups that we are necessarily used to reach out to vaccinate. So it's even hard to quantify how many of people are in each group and how can we measure progress. So this is another barrier or difficulty that we have. The third point I would like to say is the kind of the importance that is attributed to vaccination this time around with COVID. So political pressure from the population, from the media, demand for data and urgency around that you might never have seen before in vaccination, which actually will become very urgent as you start rolling the vaccine out. There's also these issues about the prioritization that I talked about and the equity considerations and even potential queue jumping. So people who want to get vaccinated ahead of their status in the line. And finally, of course, all these uncertainties that exist around duration of protection, whether in future vaccines might be interchanged or not, all of these things, details and big questions that we don't know yet, which actually means that we don't know what the long-term strategy will be. So we know now what the pandemic phase looks like. And depending on the success of that, you know, like future vaccination might be focusing on at-risk groups only, or it might be like seasonal flu vaccination, or it might be some outbreak model, or it might become an ongoing effort of somehow the same intensity as now. And I think Etienne put the link to that COVID-19 dashboard in there. So that's a dashboard that's hosted by WHO that has all the cases, but also vaccine information rollout right there. Next slide, please. Let me go a bit faster. So first of all, to say that depending on where you are, your country might have like one of two systems to monitor vaccination. So the first system, which is normal in a lot of the lower and middle income countries, I'll try to be talking a bit slower. A lot of the lower and middle income countries have an aggregate reporting system, which means that vaccinators or people at the service delivery level tally vaccinations, and they only report numbers of vaccinations that they provided. In the other system, the electronic immunization registry system, all the immunization data, all the vaccination data with the name of the individual and the vaccines that are given are somehow centralized in a central database, and it can be looked at from there. Now, either way, in either system, there are home-based records, there will be facility-based records, and there will be tally sheets and reports of some kind. So those are relevant things for probably about everybody. So we're going to focus on those. Next slide, please. First of all, the personal vaccination card. So the certificate or the card or whatever you call it, or the home-based record. The use of that is first of all, of course, for the person to remind them when their next dose is due. The second is, of course, for you yourself as health workers, for you to help establish whether this person needs another dose or not. They're used in coverage evaluation service. And you use them to get the vaccination data for adverse event following immunization, and in case of a positive test, for example, to kind of like see what vaccine was used and why you still had a test, etc. Here in red, I mentioned the use of proof of vaccination, and I put that in red because it's a red hot topic right now. It's given a lot of priority. And this is about kind of the certificates, the use of health data for non-health uses, for example, to travel, to go to bars or cinemas or whatever that is, or to school. And the data that is needed, you can see there, but in general, there's just personal data, per vaccine data, per vaccination data, you know, the vaccine product, the batch, the date of vaccination, which facility provided to make it all traceable. And then finally, a return date of when the person needs to come back to the health facility. Next slide, please. I won't talk a lot about this lot because there's not much time left in my blog, but just to say that the proof of vaccination, as I said, is really becoming a very hot topic, and the need for digital certificates that might at some point be used for international travel, for example, as well. Now, just to say that in international travel, and WHO actually has a position about that, so both for scientific reasons, so that we don't know exactly if the vaccine protects people from spreading the infection, but also for ethical reasons that everybody should have a chance to be vaccinated before these things are being made mandatory. WHO is actually not in favor of using vaccine certificates for international travel. But of course, countries will unavoidably start using vaccine certificates for certain uses in countries that are not health related. And in that case, it might be useful to also digitize that to make the certificate more robust. Next slide, please. Apart from the home-based records, the records that go with people, there's also facility-based registers, so kind of that book that lady has, where she tracks all the vaccinations of the people in her care, and there about the same data are collected. Just to say that for the use of COVAX AMC countries, so the countries that benefit from COVAX vaccines, there's a no-fault compensation scheme that might potentially compensate people that have severe AFIs with long-term consequences and severe consequences or death. And in the context of that, it's actually very important that vaccinations are recorded properly with the batch number, etc. Next slide, please. I think this is a final slide on the reporting requirements and disaggregation. So I said that there's a lot of urgency and need for data that will be there from public health authorities and from political authorities in each country. And there will be likely kind of a demand to have that data in a very frequent and very detailed way. And I kind of designed a small tally sheet of how you could capture, for example, all vaccinations given to people over and under 60, with or without a health condition, and whether they are female and male. And yeah, it becomes very complex very quickly. So you see there are already a lot of boxes and the tally sheets become very complex. So this will be complex reporting, and on top of that, it will become frequent reporting. So this might be become difficult for people in countries, and it's important actually to balance the need for good data with also the work it takes by health workers to get all this data and to record all this data. I think that's the next slide. That's the last slide, but next slide, please. Yes, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Madhav.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much. So I'm just, after this very nice introduction, which was given by Jan, I'm going to be continuing with the mechanism for reporting and also monitoring adverse events following immunization. And what is going to be happening is it's going to be a very kind of a very practical session, which I'm going to be talking to you about. It's going to be very hands-on. Now, what you see on the screen right now is actually what we call as the Aefi surveillance cycle, the adverse events following immunization surveillance cycle. The cycle basically starts off with the stage of detection. And what you see on the screen right now is it can be detected either by the patient himself or herself. Sometimes if it is a child, it is, nowadays you don't give vaccinations for children. This was designed earlier also, but one of the guardians, or supposing if it's a very old person, then the person who's responsible for the person will also be reporting this particular adverse event. So that is when it gets reported, or when the health system becomes notified. That is the stage of notification. So once the first stage is becoming aware, the second stage is notifying to the health system. The next stage is actually the stage of reporting. Now, what is the meaning of this word reporting here? It means a standard adverse event following immunization reporting form is filled up by any of these people. It could be a health worker, it could be a nurse, it could be a doctor or a medical officer or somebody like that. Now, this is the next stage. So filling up the reporting form. Now, the next stage is a stage of investigation. Now, when you look at adverse events which get reported, not all adverse event which gets reported need to be investigated. Only the serious adverse events which get reported need to be investigated. Now, the serious adverse events are, things like, death, disability, hospitalization, congenital anomaly, those kind of adverse events need to be investigated. Now, the data which is collected from the reporting system as well as from the investigation is actually analyzed. What they do is they put the data into a line list and then they kind of analyze. I'm going to explain all this in detail in a few minutes. Then the next stage is a stage of causality assessment. Now, what is the meaning of this word causality assessment? By the word causality assessment, what we are trying to do is, among the adverse events which get reported, we are really trying to find out what really caused the adverse event. Was it vaccine-related adverse event, or was it coincidental, or was it something in between? I'm not able to make out. In fact, we use the word indeterminate for that. That is, you cannot really find out whether it is vaccine-related or whether it was coincidental. Now, this is the basic principle. Now, let us look at it in COVID terms. What has changed and how is things different? So let us look at it in terms of this one. So in COVID, we have actually developed from the safety team, from the pharmacovigilance team, we have actually developed this manual, what you see on the right side of the screen. This manual is available for you to download. It has got it has got 9 modules. It also includes a communications module, which means how should you talk to the parents? How do you want to talk to the vaccinated persons? How do you want to talk to the guardians? What should be the principle for bringing up, which is the conditions to bring the cases back to the health system, to notify the health system? That is talked about. So that is the first thing. When you look at the stage of reporting, there is a standard reporting form which is already available for all vaccines. Now that has been modified for COVID, if you see. So what you see on the screen in the red, it is available. You just have to go online, and if you the manual which I showed you, it has got links to all this. You just click on that, and then you will be able to download this reporting form. What is different here this time? We need to mention the name of the manufacturer. We need to also look at higher age groups. The original reporting form, which had 25 variables, there are some few variables which are COVID specific, which has been added. Jan just mentioned now about the no-fault compensation mechanism. The first stage is actually to make sure you document it correctly. The brand name of the vaccine and also the name of the manufacturer should be very clearly documented here. And also the time of vaccination, Iefi, etc. Then the next stage is actually the filling up the line list. So there is also a standard from the contents of the Aefi reporting form. The line list is actually populated. Now, when you look at investigations, the investigation is usually done using a standard Aefi investigation form, which has been again modified for COVID. And what you see here is the red colored fonts have been modifications which have been made for the COVID specific modifications. As I said, that book which is there online, you can download all these forms whenever you want. There is also standard things like, for instance, this what you see here is actually the aid memoir. Sorry, this one is the aid memoir for Aefi reporting. This is the aid memoir for Aefi investigation, I'm sorry. And this is also used. This will help you with your investigations. And there is also a software available for investigating adverse events. Again, you just go to Google, type out Aefi investigation assistance module, all the steps which are necessary, including the forms, everything online. Now, if you want to understand how to investigate an Aefi case, there is an online e-learning courses available. You can just easily go to in Google, just type Aefi investigation e-learning course. You can go, you can practice yourself and do it and also learn how to do it. The next thing is actually for data analysis. This is an important component. So right now, we are talking about two types of reporting. One is actually the DHIS2 based reporting. The form which is being filled up that with 25 core variables can actually be uploaded into DHIS2. And the DHIS2 based AEF has been developed, and each country will have to get what we call as a tracker module installed. And using the tracker module, it can be reported to the global database. The other option which is available is the standard form which is there, which is the VG-flow based reporting, AEFI reporting. So what is this VG-flow? This is the standard data flowing database which is available with the regulators. Right now, this has been modified to make it available up to the district level. We have also done one more thing. The same AEFI reporting form which was there will also has been incorporated into VG-flow, which means you can use this one to share data with the global database. The next one is actually doing the causality assessment. So when you look at determining the cause or the causality assessment, it is done by a committee. It is not done by people sitting in the field. Usually it is done at a national level. And if it is a big country, then there are also subnational AEFI committees there who determine the cause. Now, how is it done? There is a standard method available, which is actually the causality assessment method by WHO. You just, again, it is easily accessible. Just go to the WHO website, or even just in Google, you just type out AEFI causality assessment. The book, what you see there, the manual, what you see there is can be downloaded, and you can learn how to do it. Then the next thing is there's a very interesting software there online. You can go again in Google and just type AEFI software, causality assessment software. You can get this in 6 UN languages. It is available. You can, and the committees can use this one, and even they can generate a PDF report after doing the causality assessment. Now, there is an e-learning course which has also just been developed. It is just about to start. Probably in another couple of weeks, it should be available for use to everybody. So that is it. I would just like to stop with that. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mada, for that fantastic presentation, and to Jan for the wonderful presentation on monitoring. We will now go to our panel on COVID-19 vaccine reporting. Next slide, please. We have a number of questions for our panelists who can talk about the value of reporting at the national level. So I'd ask all of the panelists to please turn on their video, and I'll start by asking the first question. How does robust reporting on adverse events following immunization and COVID-19 vaccination uptake help countries with decision making? I'll turn first to Marta and Jan, followed by Madhav and Adwa. Please feel free to unmute yourself and respond accordingly.
Right, maybe I'll quickly respond to that. So on uptake monitoring, so the main reason why it's done is actually to detect problems in the rollout in a timely way. And then actually that allows you to do some root cause analysis, find out what the barriers are. So what might be the problem, why some area, for example, of the country is slower to take up the vaccine? Is it because they get less vaccine? Is the demand a bit lower? Or are there supply problems or any kind of logistical problem? So basically, the main reason why we monitor is exactly this, to identify issues and problems and take corrective action. And that might be with uptake, but also if you see that, for example, the vaccine is being inequitably distributed, so you might have to reinforce that. Over.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll now turn to our vaccine safety colleagues, Madhav and Adwa, for their response on how this can help with Iefi reporting. Please feel free to unmute and respond. Adwa, would you like to begin?
Madhav, you were talking, but you're muted, so we can't hear you. If you want to go.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, Adwa, you want to go first? If you want, please go ahead.
Sure. Good day, everyone. I'm Ajwa Bentianchel with the Vaccine Department here at WHO and supporting the vaccine safety activities for COVID-19 vaccines. Just a couple of points to note in response to this question. First of all, for any new vaccine, it is very important once the vaccine is approved and in use, that safety monitoring is in place, just because the size of clinical trials before a vaccine is approved is such that very rare events are likely not going to be picked up in clinical trials. So one of the advantages of having a robust safety monitoring system after licensure is that serious and rare events can be picked up. In the context of the pandemic response, it's also even more important because the vaccine rollout is very dynamic and across multiple countries. It's very important to monitor and ensure that all the safety data accumulated across all the countries using the vaccines and can be used to further inform whether recommendations should be updated. For example, a particular safety risk may only be identified once the vaccines are in use and may be specific for a particular subpopulation. So the recommendations for use of the vaccine can be adjusted accordingly. And the last point that I would make is, in order to have such a robust database, it's very important that all vaccinated persons who experience adverse events are seeing a healthcare professional who can ensure the data are submitted in the country's adverse event monitoring system. Over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adwa. And over to Mara.
I think Ajwa has kind of covered all the points very beautifully. I would just like to add that, please remember from the healthcare perspective, healthcare workers are always worried. I'm sending this particular information. What is really happening to it? Now, please remember, especially it is related to point number 3, what is written there. What have we learned from implementing countries to streamline this reporting? Even the tiny bits of information which has been provided by each of you has been critical in consolidating and giving, and patterns are beginning to emerge. For your information, at the global level, the data what you are supplying in the form of sending those tiny reports, those individual reports are very, very carefully monitored on a weekly basis, and it is presented to global committees for very important decision making. So I just wanted to just add on to what Ajwa said, and then please remember, healthcare workers and also all medical staff, everyone reporting AEFI cases and also strengthening the system is very important, particularly in the COVID context, because we get tiny bits of information which actually pools the data together, which is beginning to show a lot of patterns. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mara. I'll now turn to Alia to talk through how robust reporting on IEFI is linked to the work of the no-fault compensation mechanism. Alia, if you could turn on your video and explain that, that would be great.
Yes, sure. So I don't know how much people know about the no-fault compensation program, so I'll just very quickly say something about it. So it's a program that has been set up. Basically, we know that in general, I mean, the vaccines, COVID vaccines have so far been very safe, but even with vaccines that have not been, have gone through the pre-qualifications as opposed to emergency use licensing, on very rare occasions, you will get some serious adverse events. So the program was set up to ensure compensation for individuals suffering from serious adverse events that lead to permanent injury or death. And there are certain requirements for this. So they will, an injury is defined as hospitalization or prolongation of existing hospitalization for at least 24 hours and permanent or partial impairment, either total or partial impairment, but it has to be permanent, or death. So in these cases, eligible individuals living in the advanced market commitment economy, these are 92 low and low middle income countries that are eligible for this. So all vaccines that are provided through COVAX to these countries so anyone resident in these countries is eligible to apply for this. And in order to apply, so the program is going to go live tomorrow. Although anybody who's received the vaccine before can still apply. The portal is going live tomorrow. I can send the link. It's at covaxclaims.com. I'll put it in the answers so people can access. There's a lot of information there with questions and answers about the program. So in terms of monitoring, the key thing is that certain information is absolutely critical. I think Jan mentioned that. We need information on the batch number. We need to verify that the vaccine is a COVAX distributed or procured vaccine, because unfortunately, this will not cover any vaccines that are brought in through bilateral arrangements with the country that are not COVAX distributed. So to verify that, we need the batch number, we need additional information that allows the claims administrator to investigate the claim and provide compensation. So as was highlighted, so you have the date of vaccination, the site of vaccination, also information on the diluent, if the vaccine has a diluent, and so on. So I think that's it. Happy to address any additional questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alia. And I'll actually start to pull one question from the Q&A, just because I think it's really interrelated to this topic that you're discussing now before we continue forward. And that's a question from Ahmed, which is, how does robust Iefi investigation counteract the possibility of abusing the no-fault compensation mechanism? If we could just turn to Alia and Mada to provide a response on that. I think it's really related to what we're talking about right now.
Okay, I think so you're talking about fraudulent claims, I assume. So, I mean, clearly the claims administrator is actually extremely well versed in this. And one of the reasons this claims administrator was chosen by the COVAX was because they have presence, they have access, they can do country level investigation in all 92 advanced market commitment. So in addition, so there is when an applicant makes a claim, so there is a form for the applicant to fulfill the claim, but then there is another form which has to be filled out by a registered healthcare worker. And there will be a lot of additional information and proofs for, hospitalization and so on. So there's a lot in there. And if there is any suspicion, they are able to investigate. Over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What we'll do now in the interest of time is we'll continue through to our what's next, and then we'll go directly to our Q&A. As I see, there's a number of folks posting questions in the Q&A feature. So we'll go first to the next slide. If the Echo India team could kindly take us to the next slide. Wonderful. And one more. Wonderful. So I'll just briefly point out that recordings from the session will be available in English, French, and Spanish, and that you are welcome to ask questions through the Q&A feature, as well as through TechNet and Telegram. Those links will be included in the chat. We do have upcoming sessions on vaccination strategies and on mobilizing financing resources for the scale up of COVID-19 vaccination, and the registration links are available. And now with the next slide, we'll turn to the questions that we're receiving from the audience, because we are receiving a number both through the Q&A feature and the chat. We ask all participants to kindly submit their questions through the Q&A feature so that we can respond to them accordingly. Wonderful. And I'll first turn to a question from Philippa. The question is, what is the threshold on reporting of Iefi? For example, Philippa talks about how some serious Iefi requiring medical consultation is likely to reach the health workers, but some of the more minor Iefis may not. And they may not accordingly trigger a report. And it would be helpful to clarify in the discussion, really, what is the threshold for a severe Iefi? I'll turn to our panelists to respond to this question.
Can I take this question, please?
Please.
Yes, thanks, Soshana. Thank you very much for this important question. First of all, we should understand something. When we talk about reporting, there is a question of notification and reporting. Okay. Now, the stage of notification means the person has you at the time of vaccination, you should be able to first of all educate the beneficiary or the recipient as to what to expect after vaccination. That's step number one. Now, when you after vaccination, that is based on the training materials which were just provided by Shoshana. You had specifically those 3 links, and in those links, they will tell you what to expect after vaccination. So once you know what to expect after vaccination, the next thing you also tell them is what to do if you get these kind of events. So when you say what to do when you get these kind of events, supposing if it is fever, very high fever, pain at injection site, some kind of swelling in the arm, these are the things which you are kind of anticipating. So you can just say there will be advice to give paracetamol tablets. There will be some kind of, whatever the local kind of, treatment to be provided. Now, you should also be advising if there is an adverse event, what to do. Now, at that point in time, when that response to occur of what to do, when the recipient comes back health system with a complaint, all complaints, irrespective of whatever it is, warrants a reporting form to be completed. So when you talk about the reporting form to be completed, we are talking about the variables. You just complete it, and then it has to be sent to the next stage. And when the person who's your supervisor looks into this particular document, if it fits into 5 categories, that is a hospitalization, disability, congenital anomaly, prolongation of existing hospitalization, or a death, in that case, it has to be investigated. So it is. So I think I'm making it very, very clear as to which of those AEFI cases to be investigated. Now, why minor cases have to be investigated? That is the next question. Minor cases have to be investigated because if a person comes to you with high fever, if there is a clustering of AEFIs for a particular brand, it can indicate something like higher reactogenicity of a particular brand of a particular vaccine. So all AEFIs, irrespective of whether it is minor or severe or serious, should be reported, period.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Madhav, for that response. And I see that there's a lot of interest in the e-learning module for causality assessment. Madhav, can you kindly respond to the question about how people can access these e-learning resources?
Okay, so basically there are 3, from the safety perspective, there are 3 types of e-learning courses which are available, and one is in the pipeline. What is the e-learning course which is already available? There is one, if you just go to Google and type vaccine safety basics, that gives you the basic idea on AEFIs. So that is one of those e-learning courses. The second one is actually AEFI investigation e-learning course. So this is also available. Again, you just have to do this, and I showed you this, the screenshot. The course on causality assessment is just ready, in the sense it's just waiting for one final clearance from WHO headquarters, and we hope that by the 1st of April or so, actually not first week of April, because by the 12th of April, to be precise, is the final stages of that one's development will occur, and then immediately mid-April it should be available for public use. Again, we will be making sure that that particular information is shared with all of you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I see there's a question about how folks can monitor gaps on storage, transportation, and other key factors for COVID-19 vaccine introduction. I'd like to turn to Jan and to Marta to talk about monitoring other types of key components that are important for COVID-19 successful introduction. Jan and Marta, can you respond?
Sure, maybe I can start and Marta can complement. So, but basically, thanks for the question. I think it is very important indeed not to only look at the uptake and the coverage if you want, but also to all the barriers and all these systems that need to be in place to get the vaccine safely to where they need to go. I was just looking on the website for the link. There's actually also a document on logistics, so how to organize logistics for COVID vaccine distribution, but it's indeed very important that kind of the same, it's probably the same systems that are already in place to distribute EPI vaccines that can be used for COVID vaccine monitoring, the supply chain aspects of that. And that includes, first of all, the quantities that are being distributed and needed and requested, but also the temperatures, for example, in the transport and in the storage places, especially for these few vaccines that actually require ultra cold chain temperatures. But I'll try to look this link up and I'll forward that as well.
Perfect, Jan. While you were talking, I found the link, so I'm putting it into the response right now. So good teamwork. Great. We have a question in the Q&A feature for Alia, and that is, why is there a no-fault compensation mechanism for COVID-19 vaccines, but not for other vaccines?
It's a very good question. Thanks, Shoshana. So basically, because so COVID-19 vaccines have been made available through COVAX, have all received regulatory approval for emergency use. So they've not been fully pre-qualified. So this puts the manufacturers in a tricky situation because they don't have the normal risk transfer solutions. Like basically manufacturers cannot get either the insurance or self-insurance in case of liability. So what happened is that the manufacturers were not comfortable supplying to the low-income countries because they don't, like some countries are providing a reassurance or immunity against a liability. However, a lot of the low and middle income countries don't provide that, and manufacturers says we cannot provide unless you sign an indemnification agreement, which means that if there is a claim through court, then the country has to pay, has to take, compensate the manufacturer or other key stakeholders for this. So in order to ensure that the countries really get the vaccine, we set up this no-fault compensation program was set up specifically for COVID. So basically the answer is it's because it's under emergency use and to make sure that all countries have access to the vaccine. Countries, of course, some countries have a no-fault compensation program for vaccines in general, like the US or whatever, and that's a country they can do that. And the rationale is that basically when you have a compensation program that provides a rapid compensation in a lump sum, and it's compensation program, once somebody gets compensated, they have to sign a release agreement saying that they will not go to court, because court proceedings can be very, very expensive and very lengthy, and these proceedings will have to be reimbursed by the country. So in short, it is to allow equitable access to COVID vaccines by all countries. Over.
Wonderful. I see that there are questions about Iefi and vaccination and what is allowed for the no-fault compensation mechanism. Alia, can you kindly respond to this question from Christine, and I will translate it and share the translation with you here.
So the question is, sorry?
What is the margin between vaccination and the effect to be taken into account for the compensation mechanism?
Okay.
Maybe other folks can provide a better translation.
So you have a maximum period of 5 years, which is, so there is, all of this is in the website, so it's more details, but basically somebody can make a claim within, from the time of administration. So let's say each vaccine has a reporting period, a scope of coverage of 24 months. And this starts from the day the vaccine is administered in any country. So it's not in any AMC country. So for example, we know the Pfizer was first administered in 8th of December in the UK. That was the first time it gets used. So then you have 2 years for this vaccine up to the 8th of December 2022, where if anybody gets administered this vaccine in this period of time, they can request compensation in the case of an serious adverse event. And then on top of that, they have an additional 36 months. So basically the time difference between the time of administration until the end of the 2-year period, which is called the scope of coverage, plus 36 months. So there is plenty of time basically to allow for any adverse events that people may feel that it's linked to the vaccine in a longer period of time.
Thank you so much, Alia. We now have a couple of questions for Mana, for Ottawa, about AEFIs. In particular, Mohammed asks, what is an AEFI cluster? Is it the same type of AEFI, or should it be a condition with different signs or symptoms? As well, he asks, how does the AEFI for COVID-19 vaccines differ from other types of medicines or vaccines?
Ajwa, you want to go first, please? Ajwa, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm getting very unstable Wi-Fi, and I was also answering one of the questions online. Shoshana, I believe the question you just read out was how AEFIs following COVID vaccines are different from other vaccines? Was that the question?
Yep, that's one part of the question. And the second part of the question is, what is an AEFI cluster?
So when we talk about an AEFI cluster, it would be a number of adverse event reports, or people experiencing adverse events who are associated either in time. So for example, in a mass campaign, you can have a number of people all having adverse events within, let's say, 6 hours after the mass campaign. That would be considered a cluster if the pattern of AEFI is the same among that group of people. Or a cluster might be a group of people having adverse events after they receive the vaccine from the same batch of the vaccine. So the normal parameters we would be considering if we are looking at clusters would be time, either the place of vaccination, they were all vaccinated in the same clinic, or the vaccine itself, like the same batch of vaccine. And that allows us to zoom in on a particular investigation to see whether it has something to do with the batch, with the vaccination procedure itself in the clinic, etc. Now, in terms of how COVID AEFI reporting differs from other adverse events, I think I mentioned earlier on that with any new vaccine, it is important to have particular attention to AEFI reporting. For example, phase 3 clinical trials, which are the typical clinical trials before a vaccine is approved, or in this case receives EUL approval from WHO. Phase 3 trials would normally be about, let's say, 30,000 to 50,000 participants in the trial. So if you have an adverse event that is occurring about 1 in a million people, or even 1 in 100,000 people, it is logical that that adverse event is very likely not going to be picked up in a clinical trial with 50,000 people. And therefore, it makes it important to ensure that new vaccines, once they are in use, are being monitored. In other respects, I would say that monitoring of AEFIs for COVID vaccines is the same as other vaccines, other than what I just mentioned about new vaccines. We also have something called adverse events of special interest. So for any particular vaccine, there might be a biological plausibility to think that a particular risk may exist with the vaccine, and therefore a list of potential adverse events of special interest, or ASI, will be identified, and those can then be monitored with extra attention, for example, in an active surveillance study. And so for COVID-19 vaccines, there are a number of adverse events of special interest that are also under monitoring. But this is nothing to do with the COVID vaccines per se. Adverse events of special interest is just one methodological approach to do safety monitoring, and has been done for other vaccines as well. Madhav, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, brilliant. I would say, you have kind of covered almost everything what I was also conceptualizing. But then there are just one or two things which since the question was asked, what is unique in this circumstances? Now, remember something, when you look at the typical classification of adverse events, there are 5 classes, actually, technically speaking, 4. One is actually what they call as a vaccine product related adverse event. And that's exactly what Ajwa was mentioning. And for this, we're talking about the adverse events where, the routine spontaneous reporting takes place. That is one. And also what she mentioned just now about the AESA, and she's beautifully described it. So this is one important thing. The next thing which we are talking about is actually a vaccine quality defect related adverse event, where there might be a problem with the manufacturing processes and things like that, and therefore you can get adverse events. Sometimes some of the ingredients in the vaccine, like some additive, can actually cause adverse events. Now, so this is the second one. The third one is actually what we call as an immunization error related adverse event, where because of a problem with regard to the vaccine storage, you give a wrong diluent. Instead of administering the diluent by manufacturer, you replace it with something else and administer, and it can create this one. The fourth one, it can create adverse events. The fourth one is an immunization anxiety related adverse event, where people get the fear of getting vaccinated, and then they sometimes develop adverse events. And the last one is actually a coincidental event. Now, looking at the COVID context, what Ajwa talked about was the product related adverse events. Now, remember something, with regard to program related adverse events, you should anticipate more AEFI from a practical standpoint. Why? Because, you should remember something, immunization programs are conventionally trained to vaccinating children. But this time we are beginning to vaccinate adults. And because we are vaccinating adults, there are certain uniqueness. The staff who administer the vaccines may be different. The recipients are completely different. And therefore, the chances of making mistakes are definitely higher. The other thing is also, when you look at immunization anxiety related reactions, and we have actually faced it this time. What we have noticed is, because see, when you normally vaccinate small children, like under 1 year, usually like infants, many of them are really not they don't know what is going on. So when you give them a shot, no problem. But when you vaccinate adults, there is always a fear about injections. And there have been actually instances of cluster related people fainting. Like, there was a question about clusters. You have actually had instances where clusters of people got so panicky about vaccination. So these are things which you should also be careful about. The last thing, but not the least, but which is very, very important, is also coincidental events. Now, when you vaccinate, for instance, if you're going to be giving this COVID vaccines, and if there is already an outbreak of, let us say, Japanese encephalitis, which is going on in one area, or thrombocytopenia, dengue outbreak, which is going on, which is causing thrombocytopenia. These kind of, the adverse, we don't really know whether the thrombocytopenia is caused because the vaccine caused it, or because there is a dengue outbreak going on, or whether the convulsions which are manifested is a coincidental event because of an ongoing outbreak. So when you do your AEFI investigations, be very careful to not only look at the patient, but also look everywhere and see whether you have to rule out other possibilities as well. Over.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adwa and Mara, for those really insightful responses. We'll conclude today's session with a word of wisdom from each of our panelists. So we'll start with Jan and Marta, followed by Adwa and Mara, and concluding with Alia. So if you can give a final closing remark. Short and sweet is perfect. Jan, do you want to start us off?
I can start, since I didn't say much anyway. I think that thank you very much for all the excellent questions. I think that's actually proved the point that recording and reporting is very important, not only to be able to promote the vaccines, but also to be able to monitor the adverse events or anything what can also go wrong. So thank you very much.
Yes, and I'll add to that, put me a bit on the spot because I don't have so much words of wisdom to share, but I think that in this period that will be very hectic, a lot of work, a lot of clinical work, and then on top of that, administrative work as well. So I think the key word might be flexibility as we move forward and things change, and they might change again in a few months and a year. And I think, yeah, flexibility to get through this together would be important.
Wonderful. Should we do Adwa, Madhav, and then Alia?
Shoshana, I think the one take-home message that I'd like to reemphasize, I hope we've said it enough, but it bears reemphasizing. An adverse event following immunization is not necessarily caused by the vaccine. And as millions of vaccine doses are being used, it is actually expected that we will pick up signals of potential adverse events that must then be very carefully evaluated to see whether they are actually caused by the vaccine, so that the right measures are put in place to minimize the risk. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Ajwa. Thanks, Soshana. From my side, I would just like to emphasize one very important take-home point. Please remember, this is a teamwork. It is not like as though one person is doing the work at all. And it's very, very, very important for sharing of information between the different stakeholders. And particularly within the country, when you talk about for the immunization program, they need to talk to the regulators. The data, the information, and also the intelligence needs to be shared. And this is very, very critical for the success of this particular program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about the no-fault compensation program a bit. I think clearly monitoring is important for, and has always been for multiple of reasons. And now we have one additional component for the AMC eligible economies is the eligibility for this, is to enable participants experiencing serious adverse events to apply for compensation. Just to say, this is the first ever global compensation mechanism that has been developed by the COVAX facility. And one thing that maybe I didn't clarify, that it will cover all serious adverse events that lead to permanent injury or death. And it's not only the vaccine, as has been explained already. So vaccine, components of the vaccine, or the administration of the vaccine. So any errors in administration will be also causing these serious adverse events will also be covered. So thank you again for everyone and their participation and questions.
Wonderful. Many thanks to our panelists. Many thanks to the ECHO team for making this event possible. Many thanks to all of our participants for taking their time today to join us in this session. We will be sharing out the presentation and the recording links. Please feel free to share them on widely. And of course, as always, many, many thanks to our fabulous interpreters. With that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, and we'll see you all next Tuesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a nice rest of the day.